Thank you both for coming in. The Columbian is pleased to welcome candidates for state representative from the 18th District, Position 1. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor. I believe you met the other members of the editorial board. Just so you know, reporter Jake Thomas is sitting in on this meeting, won't ask questions here, but might want to speak with you later. And finally, we are videotaping this. We post all of our interviews unedited on our website for the benefit of our readers. And
Perfect.
With that, we will get started. We'll begin with introductions. Just take 1 to 2 minutes to introduce yourselves, explain why you're running for this position, and then we will get into some more substantive policy questions. So we'll start with Brent.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to be here. This is, I think, fourth time we've been in doing one of these, and of course, I am Brandon Vick, state representative for the 18th District, Position 1. This is a business that is very rewarding. And it's rewarding because we get to go out and do good things to the people of Southwest Washington and hopefully the state of Washington in general. The reason I'm running is the same reason I've run in previous times. It's we have a great area, and we have a lot of opportunity. And it's always been my passion to see Southwest Washington thrive economically, thrive environmentally, just thrive and be the area we know that it is. Southwest Washington is kind of a hidden jewel to the rest of the state still. They know we're here. They sometimes think we're Portland's little brother or little sister, and it's our job as legislators to make sure that we get the attention we deserve. I think we've been doing very well at that in the last few years, especially as our delegation has come together, Republicans and Democrats. I think we can show that based on projects we've delivered, based on legislation passed, based on some of the progress we're making on things like transportation. And I'm just excited to keep that up. I think I've got a record to run on, a record I'm proud of, and happy to have the voters test that one more time.
Great, thank you. Chris?
My name is Chris Thobaben. I'm running for the 18th LD first position as a Democrat. The big reason I got involved, I got to write with the Democratic platform last year, leading up to this year. And I was a little disheartened as all these good initiatives having no real focus or direction, and so it's a situation where if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. That kind of compelled me to get involved further. Went up to the state Democratic Platform Committee, got involved there, made a good impression on some folks that then asked me if I'd be interested in running down here. I checked with my wife. She assured me that it was all right for me to run, so we stepped off. But the big priorities for me to get after is, working from the ground up. The foundation of every great society is, education. Like we build off of that. That's what makes us great. That's what allows for innovation. That's what allows for creativity, and not just in the science, technology, engineering, math, but also in your arts and in your trades and skills. Those things that nobody else can make, that somebody else will want to buy in the future. That's what makes our economy. And our economy thrives on not just having a healthy tax and policy structure that encourages businesses to grow, but also attracts new businesses and attracts folks that are startups and attracts large companies to move their headquarters here. Like even the government's starting to consider Vancouver for headquarters. And then the final thing, and this is the kind of the big focus, the Democratic Party used to be the champion of the labor, the champion of the people, the working class, and that's one of the big focuses for me. Every individual in the United States, every individual in Washington, every individual in Southwest Washington deserves to have at least a living wage, and every family deserves to have a family wage at home. Right now we are beholden to work. You don't have enough time to go home and raise your children. You don't have enough time to go home and create great things. Benjamin Franklin talked about you have 8-hour segments. You have 8 hours of sleep, you have 8 hours of work, and you have 8 hours to create and be innovative. And I think right now the way we have to work and the duration we have to work creates the conditions where people are just barely living paycheck to paycheck too often, and they're living just within their means, even in a humble lifestyle. And so that's one thing that I want to push forward and have businesses, industry, labor, and our society all engaged in this conversation of what we want to have happen. And I think it starts here in Washington as an example for the country.
Great, thank you. Brandon, I think, touched upon transportation. Let's start with that. And we'll ask Chris first. What would you prefer how should we approach the bridge? Would you prefer a third bridge, or should I-5 be the focus? What is your priority there?
I-5 is the focus. I mean, the thoroughfare as it exists is an artery between Canada and Mexico. We have the fourth largest, fifth largest economy in California. Two states south of us. Like, we cannot have a bottleneck of this magnitude in inhibiting flow through our corridor of transportation, but also hindering transportation trade here. There are in the transportation world, you have cut times. Cut times are to maintain a rhythm throughout a system. You have to make sure that freight and material moves in time and in sequence, that the bridge disrupts. And so businesses that place themselves in Ridgefield are hindered because of the bridge lifts. I think we had 400 and some last year, and the year after that and the year before that. So we have 400 times per year where you could be disrupted, and with the federal regulations for time clocks, for industry cut times, just-in-time logistics, like, we cannot have self-induced hardship by our own inability to invest and focus on the I-5 corridor. Later on generations, as we grow, we need to plan. I think this is where the Oregon and Washington Departments of Transportation need to remain involved and remain engaged, and we need to trust their guidance. These people they're not there to make a buck. They're there to ensure that the transportation infrastructure is sufficient for the future. Now, I think one of the sticking points has been, whether rail and mass transit needs to be a component of that. For federal support, which we will need to complete such a massive project, it's going to be an essential additive. And for our
for rail,
for rail, I would be yes, support? I would support, but I don't want to isolate it to rail. I work right now as one of the innovation program directors within the Marine Corps, and I see on a day-to-day basis what is coming out of our innovative communities around the country, around the world, and here in Washington. Like, we can't think of mass transportation in the old way of just people getting on, loading on a train or a subway and moving across to another point. Like, decentralized transportation is real. It's going to be here in the next 10 to 15 years. And we have to be prepared in Southwest Washington to lead that. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind and we're going to be buying it from somebody else. What I prefer is that Southwest Washington and Washington as a state creates the initiatives and legislation that allows for this to take place. If communities want to be innovative, if communities want to be bold, which I think Vancouver is one of those communities, Battleground, Ridgefield, allow them to engage in these autonomous transportation systems that allow for people to move in an efficient electrified manner that doesn't hinder their individual mobility, that allows them to travel. I think 1 kilowatt hour for one of those little scooters gives you an hour of transportation at 35 miles per hour. I mean, that gets you anywhere you want around this area. And that right there, 1 kilowatt hour, I think it's going for cents for a consumer. So you can get around your entire day for single cents. Like that's spectacular. And that's what we need to innovate with transportation. So putting a no holds bar approach on the bridge, focus on the I-5, get it fixed, and then allow for later innovation and creativity to take place. Whether it's a 5-lane with a high capacity / autonomous lane, that's the kind of stuff that I want to get after.
Brandon, what would be your preference regarding the bridge?
Yeah, well, I think we're in the middle of that right now. First and foremost, if you've lived in this county for the last 5 years, you've noticed the increase in traffic and congestion. You've noticed it's being harder to get not only yourself but your goods and services across the river. And so I think not only my preference but the only logical conclusion we can get to right now is an I-5 replacement of some sort. It's something that I've been heavily involved in. I actually was a co-sponsor of legislation to get talks started again on the bridge, or at least on the process. I serve on the bi-state bridge committee that we formed, and we're still waiting for Oregon's legislators to step up to the table too. And this is a topic that I can't even tell you how many meetings I've had on. I think Friday we've got another bi-state bridge meeting as well. I think it's important to recognize, though, that we have to get this one right. And that starts with the right process. The CRC, whether you loved it or hated it, I believe it failed because it was a top-down process. There was a bunch of, whether you call them engineers or interests or whoever in a room, that came up with a project, delivered it to the people, and then the people got to speak on it. And I think that's where it fell apart. The process that we're looking to develop right now is a process where we can hopefully avoid those conflicts and avoid those problems as we go down the road. We know that we have a difficult task ahead of us. Oregon is slowly coming to the table, it seems like, but they're still going to need some convincing. And it's also important to understand as a bridge group, as a state, that there still needs to be two equal sides at the table. You've heard some folks apologizing for past actions or, kind of groveling to get Oregon to the table. This is still a real project. It's still going to cost real tax dollars, and we still need to see the benefit we're going to see or need to see from it. Again, I-5 is it's definitely the most viable option. But for me, it also comes down to ROI, right? It's not build a bridge at any cost. It's build the right bridge at the right cost. And so keeping those things in mind as we move forward is what makes the most sense to me. In our legislation we passed, we also created or hope to create a bridge authority, which is designed at looking at future options. I think it is no doubt we need third and fourth crossings at some point. And candidly, if we'd have followed our plans from 20 or 30 years ago, we'd be working on those now. That didn't happen. That's unfortunate. But look, Clark County is only going to continue to grow. And you can only slam so many lanes through downtown Portland. There are going to have to be other options. And it's our job as a legislature now to plan 10 and 20 and 30 years down the road. So again, the short answer is I-5 is the preferable option. It's the option that makes the most sense, and it's also the option we have to get right. If I spend $3 billion tax dollars on a project that doesn't improve your commute time, you're probably going to be more pissed at me than if I just left a current bridge that's sitting there. Capacity, movement, that has to be a big part of it. When it comes to transit, I think there is going to have to be some sort of transit on it, and that's where one of the fights is going to take place. It just is. We know that.
Prefer?
I think some sort of bus system makes the most sense to me, and I'm not even sure it's BRT. I think the express bus system we have now is working very well, but I think what we know and what we've seen, especially in Clark County, is that people have to move away from the corridor, right? That's where the land is. The land is not on the freeway anymore. So trains stay on tracks and they go to fixed positions. I think we need to find ways to move people to where they need to go more efficiently. Transit is not a four-letter word. Transit is viable. Transit is something that people rely on, or at least a lot of people rely on, and we're going to need to have it. But I think a more mobile bus-type system, honestly, like we have now, makes the most sense to me.
So would you oppose light rail if somebody wanted to include that?
Yeah, I think at this point I would. Obviously, though, those are things that are going to be part of the bigger discussion. We had the federal money for it last time, right? But it was, $900 million, which is a lot of money, which was great, but it didn't go to move cars or product, right? It went to move that train. So whether you get the $900 million or don't get the $900 million, it's really a moot point as far as moving people and cargo. It's something that I think our community is still not warmed up to. But again, my job is to represent my constituents. And if we got, through this planning process and my constituents finally said, hey, you know what, light rail's for me, that's a decision that I get to make at that point. But right now, I think people want to move themselves, their vehicles, and their cargo. And, as progressive as Clark County might be becoming, I think people like their cars. People like their freedom. People like going from A to B, and I don't think that's something we're going to get rid of with government policy or any sort of social engineering.
Yeah, when you say the CRC you think was a top-down process, but didn't they hold dozens or hundreds of community meetings and public meetings?
Well, they absolutely did, and I obviously wasn't around for the entirety of this CRC. That was a very long project. But in my experience, most of the discussion centered around here is the project we've proposed, and whether you want to call it lip service or genuine, I'm not sure, but now give us your comments on this project. And, I think it was maybe not the most genuine form of constituent communication and interaction. Were tweaks made here and there? They probably were, but again, I think this was a project that was designed and forced on people, or at least tried to be forced on people, more than a true collaborative process.
So then it's the alternative to start with a public vote, say?
I don't think it's a vote, but I think it's really getting the stakeholders to the table. The public is obviously a huge stakeholder. Your freight lines are a huge stakeholder. Your folks who are moving goods and services are a big stakeholder. We obviously have business interests involved, and folks who are commuting on a daily basis. So I think, it would be impossible to have all, 450,000 Clark County residents at the table. But good representation of each group is what we're going to look for, and that's what I'm charged with helping to find.
So you mentioned, Brandon, you mentioned with the CRC, the lack of bandwidth in that solution. Do you recall what how many lanes were on the CRC project as it was proposed?
Probably depends on how you measure, but I guess 5 each way would be the technical answer. You have 3 through lanes and then 2 kind of on-ramp, off-ramp merging type lanes. So 5 in each direction would be.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I believe it was 5, if I remember correctly. So,
great, thanks. You both have the correct answer.
okay.
Which a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
How many lanes right after the ridge is another story.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions on transportation?
Well, I'm a little selfish. I live in the 18th district, so
Yeah.
I wanted to know what your thoughts are on where the 179th Street interchange should fall in the priorities for the state. Brandon, maybe you can answer first.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very high priority, quite honestly, and I think we've expressed that. It was obviously in the last transportation package, and it was maybe a little further down the list than folks would have liked. We've succeeded in getting at least some of the planning and design money moved up because other folks have fallen off the list, and we've worked hard as a delegation on that. And when you move up to planning money, you generally get to move up to construction money a little ways down the road. 179th is the next, golden goose we have in this area. People are leery of development at times, and that absolutely makes sense. But 179th is where our economy grows. 179th opens up the Discovery Corridor. 179th opens up more room for housing. 179th, which if viewers don't know, is the fairgrounds exit, is slated for big things. We're going to not only get more houses, but places where people can go and earn a living. We're going to have opportunity to expand Clark College up there, hopefully another hospital through Peace Health. And we have just the corporate campus vision, I guess, to bring real jobs to the area. This all ties in with a lot of things we've done, though, whether it be the dark fiber legislation that's going to provide massive amounts of bandwidth and IT to that area, so folks are able to get the good-paying, high-wage jobs. And 179th is just key to that. Obviously, Discovery Corridor goes all the way kind of to the center, so there's other things in that, Pioneer Street and the others. But I think 179th is going to be big. And quite honestly, if you're in the county, you rely a lot on homeowners' property taxes to foot the bill. 179th gives us an opportunity to kind of spread that burden out a little bit and get the kind of the corporate and retail sales side of that into the equation too.
Chris, is that a golden goose or a lame duck out there?
I think it's golden goose. I mean, the direction of flow for growth, in my opinion, is a predominantly north to south movement. So as we have an opportunity to give greater backfill within Vancouver, that it allows for greater density in Vancouver. But as the population grows, northbound on 5 seems a logical option for that. The 179 corridor, giving access both 205 and the 5, is a superb branching point if you need to go south, east, or north. With the material, and so on the moving atoms around, it's a good spot. And with the dark fiber, I think that is a superb opportunity. I would go a step further to say that it's also an opportunity to engage with industry to achieve a vision for Washington and to achieve a vision for Southwest Washington that benefits our community. So we're engaging right now in we have a clean energy crisis or an environmental crisis with global warming. So this is an opportunity for us to say, here's a place where clean energy can take hold. Those types of jobs, just like digital technology jobs, they foster high-page, living wage, family wage jobs for a single earner. And then those energy jobs can feed that digital technology so that we can have server farms, so that we can have those high energy demands. The thing that we can't outsource is energy production. And if we can create something here that nobody else in the world can compete with or create, now we're creating a unique service that will continue to pay benefits over the long term of its investment. and that's one thing that I want to focus our economy on, is those types of industries and trades and skills jobs that can't be outsourced, whether it's localized manufacturing, small scale, advanced manufacturing, additive manufacturing, however you want to refer to it. But they all are going to be energy intensive going forward. Bill Gates has defined the difference between a third world and first world is no longer defined by stuff and money and stuff. It's electricity. The access to electricity is the defining difference between third and first world. And even in our own communities where energy is cheap, you can attract companies. Aluminum manufacturing requires an immense amount of electricity. Steel manufacturing and modern forges requires an immense amount of electricity. We have 2 heavy lift cranes that are really a rarity, not just on the West Coast, but in the world. We have the opportunity to use our Longview Port's heavy crane lift to be a place where trade and exchange of heavy materials goes through. And so that's why I see 179th as being a perfect hub where you have population services, healthcare, schools that are all superb with close proximity to intermodal exchange and customers.
Recently, the community here made the decision to not support the oil terminal that was destined for Vancouver. Was that a good decision, or would you have supported what ultimately happened, or would you be in favor of the development of that kind of a port?
I think it was a good decision to push back against that. It would have created jobs in the short term, but what we're interested in is not people to move in for a couple of years, work a gig, and then move out, or be back on the unemployment rolls. Like, we want long-term employment opportunities. The oil terminal would have given a short boost and a long-term risk, and that long-term risk is only levied upon those people who live in our community. And so the rest of the state, the rest of the country, they get to benefit at our risk. And if, one disaster, you saw the oil terminals out east. We had up in Canada the big fire that killed a bunch of people in that Canadian community. Like, those are real risks with highly flammable materials, and that's effectively what we're going to be doing. Not to mention the downwind effects. Look at the cancer rates in the Midwest and Northeast. Like, there's a reason that line of cancer trails out, basically starting down in Texas where they do all the refinement and continuing on to the Northeast following the jet stream. Like, these are real costs, and when you talk about like business taxes and you talk about like community benefits, we would be incurring an additional cost on ourselves that they would not be paying for. People would be having to pay out of their pockets for higher health insurance. People would have to be paying out of their pockets for more local infrastructure costs. Like, those are not things that an oil terminal will be able to sufficiently pay off. And so, to me, we need to double down our investments on the future that provides long-term local community jobs rather than somebody else's market share and shareholder returns elsewhere.
Great. Brandon?
Yeah, my position, I think this has probably been around all 6 years since I've been elected, and my position always has been, if it cleared the FSEC process, if it cleared the science, I was supportive, and if it didn't, it wasn't something I was going to go back and fight for or fight against. And, I think my line of reasoning stays the same there. I think we have to acknowledge that this is an industrial port. Terminal 5 is going to have something big and probably a little bit dirty, and that's why we have industrial ports. I do think, if we would have let the project go through, and by we, I guess I mean the governor, or a similar sized project, we would be solving a lot of the problems that we're facing now. If there was a large facility at Terminal 5, Vancouver wouldn't be talking about a head tax on nonprofits or on businesses. The school district wouldn't have to worry about where any money was coming from. Property taxes would go down because of the immense amount of money coming out of a facility like would have to take place at Terminal 5. So I think something obviously is going to have to go there. We can't move enough Subarus and windmill turbines to make that piece of property valuable. The oil terminal, again, the fact that it's not here is fine by me. I do think, we would have had the safest, newest, and shiniest facility you could have imagined, and I'd rather maybe that happen here than, going to the old facility somewhere else. But at the same time, the voters made their call, the city councils made their call, and ultimately FSEC made their decision. So that's fine by me. That's the process, how it's supposed to play out, and we'll keep looking for something big and good to come into that space.
I'm gonna, just offhand, do you believe that climate change is real, and do you believe that it's caused by human activity?
I think it'd be foolish to say that humans don't contribute to climate change. I mean, I think obviously the fact that we're here versus not being here, sure, of course there's some contributing factor to that. I don't think that humans are causing the decay of the world, and I don't think that climate change is based solely on human activity. But of course, we're here, we're causing pollution, we're doing things, we're mining, we're driving, we're burning coal or what have you. And so yeah, I mean, humans obviously play some role in that. When I look at this type of policy, I again like to look at return on investment, right? Washington, if we haven't reached it yet, we're going to be the cleanest state in the union once the coal power goes offline. And so you kind of look at what policies would make that better and how much would it make it better. I mean, we could take every car off the road in Washington and make an infinitesimal impact on the world climate. So when I look at issues like that, I want to make sure that we're making the right decisions. I want to make sure that the decisions are not negatively impacting the overall economy. But I'm also an Eagle Scout, right? Leave the outdoors better than you found it. I mean, that's the outdoor code, and that's something I like to live by. And my industry for most of my life has been making the outdoors better. So, again, do humans have some impact? Of course, but is it an impact, at least in Washington, that's causing the end of society? No.
Will you support 1631?
Absolutely not. No, I think that's a terrible piece of legislation, and it negatively impacts Clark County probably more than most. 1631 is going to, tax polluters, which really means tax you and me, about $2.3 billion over the next 5 years. And if you dig into it, it's actually kind of sad. 8 of the 12 biggest polluters, they get off scot-free. That's not acceptable. I mean, the coal power plant gets off scot-free. Airline fuel, maritime fuel, everything that has a good lobbyist working for it really kind of got off scot-free in this deal. In Clark County, you're going to see, if this thing passes, you're going to see increased fuel prices in the multiple tens of cents. Because we get a lot of our power from our natural gas power plant, we're going to get hammered on electricity rates. If you heat your home with oil or any other sort of fuel, you're going to get tagged on there. I mean, they're predicting the average family in not in Clark County, but in the state, is going to be paying up to $800 more a year just in fees and costs from this initiative. So, no, I don't think it's a good thing. And the other reason I don't think it's a good thing is because there's no accountability set up for where this money goes, and there's no requirement that it actually reduces pollution. If you said we're going to tax $1 billion and we're going to reduce pollution by this much by doing X, Y, and Z, I guess the argument would be easier to handle. But we're going to dole the money out to agencies, and they're going to be able to write grants and do pet projects. The governor gets a little slush fund. I mean, this thing is not well thought out. Reducing carbon is a noble goal, but we got to have the right system in place. And as I mentioned earlier, the ROI has to be there. There's no return on investment here, in my opinion.
Chris, start with your thoughts on climate change and humans contribute.
Climate change is real. Humans contribute. We are the driving force. We have there is a new geologic age or epoch because of because of human activity. In thousands and tens of thousands of years, millions of years, whoever's digging into the soil will be able to say, "Oh, look at this! This humans were here for this short period of time." Like that's the degree of impact we have around the world. That aside. 1631 has an opportunity to redefine where Washington stands and to have the full cost of this polluting effect on those industries and businesses that create it. And right now they don't have to pay for that, and the people who have to suffer the impacts are the forestry industries, the farmers, and you're lost, you're left behind, and you're lonely. Like those are the people that have to incur the cost. And Washington is one state and one country and one world, but we have our part to play. And this is we're upstream or upwind from the most of the country, Canada in particular. We are still, even with 1631, we're lagging behind British Columbia's efforts. We're lagging behind California's efforts. We're lagging behind the leaders in this, and not only that, but we're lagging behind the initiatives that will promote economic creativity here. There's nothing that will create more jobs and opportunity than creating tomorrow. And that's what I can't emphasize enough. Like, yes, there are costs that incurred on the existing businesses of today. that will be assessed as fees directly to double down in inventions and technology. But those types of things are things that we will be able to offer the world that the rest of the world doesn't have right now. I mean, China is going to monopolize the solar industry if we let them do so. Germany is going to monopolize. They're backing off the nuclear piece, but the nuclear piece, if we don't step up, like we are effectively handing over our future economy and the tools of the trade to other folks because we aren't willing to lean forward into what needs to happen. And I think this is a step to levy fees on those industries that contribute most heavily to our current situation.
So what Brandon just said, though, is that the biggest polluters are not going to be taxed. So I don't know.
Well, first of all, I think he's wrong. It's not a tax; it's a fee.
Or a fee.
Yeah.
Said.
But I don't think the biggest polluters. Like they talk about the coal plant, for instance. The coal plant's being given a pass until its closure, and it can run in the meantime. I think it's 2035. It's supposed to shut down or something like that. It's only at 50% capacity right now. So you're effectively saying, okay, you've got a couple more years where you're not going to get this tax, so the tax is going to be levied on natural gas. Coal now becomes more financially or economically viable. Even that uptick in carbon output, because that coal plant can operate with a waiver from this fee, does not offset the long-term benefits that plant is still going to close down and the overall impact of other industries across the spectrum. So if you look at the manufacturing processes that go into anything, and those are what drive the coal plant. And if we have clean alternatives to those coal plants that are more cost effective, so nuclear, for instance, one of my biggest things that I was contributing to the Democratic platform is I took us from we oppose nuclear, so the Democratic Party for more than a decade opposed the concept of physics, apparently. Now, the Democratic platform is we call for modernization of nuclear storage, transportation, and recycling. Recycling is something that is currently not authorized by the tri-party agreement. These are types of things that if we lean forward as a community to say, yes, we want cheaper power. Nuclear is cheaper when they have the modular new scale model of nuclear, or large scale nuclear, or wind, solar. Those are the types of things that take us beyond the 21st century, not just into yesterday.
I have a couple more questions for
Speaking
Chris.
of power.
So you said you're in the Marine Corps currently?
So I was active duty for a little bit over 8 years. And I transitioned to the reserves,
Okay.
and I was in the reserves out of Kansas City. More traditional reserve drilling. I wrote a couple papers white papers that drew some ire, not bad ire, but Lieutenant General Dana, he's a forward thinker, and he gave me the opportunity to kind of put up or shut up. I was very critical of the Marine Corps in a tactful manner, and he said if I can make my ideas a reality, that he won't give me money, but I can go find it from somebody else and make it a reality. And so, over the past year and a half, I've been able to construct a team to create what's called the Hive Final Mile. It's a decentralized means of distribution with a platform-agnostic software architecture, allowing for Marines in the field to be able to get the stuff they need without depending on a chain of command and lead times that are otherwise preventing efficient distribution. And you think about the soldiers that were ambushed in Niger this past year. If you watch that video, it was in response to them having to resupply from this, not resupply, they're just getting pop and food from a local souk. And in that process, that ambush resulted in them losing control of the situation because they had to have a predictive supply chain. And right now, in the military of today and in any industry, supply chain is the weakness of that, the Achilles heel of everybody. So I'm trying to get the military past that, but on my pure focus within this is that we can construct something that can be a decentralized distribution system for the private community as well, especially in aid distribution. You think about Puerto Rico, we had 3,000 containers that hit the port to provide aid over the first 10 days. Most of those containers didn't even make it out until 28 days later because of bridge infrastructure, truck capacity, and what I'm trying to create is a deployable solution that allows for people to get life-saving aid. We went, despite what President Trump wants to admit, thousands of people died because they went from a first to a third world country overnight with the absence of electricity. You can't keep generators going forever to run refrigerators for insulin and for diabetics and dialysis patients. Like people just you live on the cusp of electricity, And if we're able to distribute these goods and these materials out for life-saving treatment, we not just change the world for our own citizens in Puerto Rico, but for citizens in Yemen, for citizens in the Rohingya community. So
Got it.
that's what I'm looking
Okay.
towards.
So, and do you
Sorry,
do that, do you
long
do that
story.
full time?
No, so say, I'm a part-time. I'm a weekend warrior, if you say. But I work remotely out of the Pentagon, and I work continuously to sustain the project on my own time.
Okay, and you live in Clark County. How long have you lived here?
A little over 2 years.
Okay. And you weren't born and raised here?
I was not. I was born in Southern Ohio, grew up on a farm, got out, went to college, went to the Marine Corps, Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia, Missouri. Had a little piece of land there, but my wife had a superb opportunity, and she's the driving force behind our family. So we jumped at the opportunity out here in Vancouver, and so she's a physician assistant
Okay.
in a GI clinic up there with Kaiser.
And you have kids?
We do have four little creatures that cohabitate our house with us. Yeah, but we have 4 kids. We have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old.
Wow. Okay.
So
Thank you.
no, not push.
Let's move on to Chris. At the beginning, you mentioned that education being a foundation
Yeah.
for any. What did you think of how the legislature dealt with the McCleary solution, and where do we go from here regarding public education?
So I think that the McCleary decision and the McCleary legislation that resulted was in writ compliance. So they checked the box for providing a centralized distribution of funds to cross level and provide parity in opportunity for education. The problem was they had a failure to appreciate the complexity of local school funding, and I think that there was the 11th hour pass of the legislation and the funding for those schools failed to appreciate all that complexity. My identification of the failure is in the structure by which we assess this problem. One, teachers are professionals that deserve, based off not just their value to our community, but based off the market that they're in, to earn a professional wage. So first of all, I want to create a pricing index that allows for teachers to be assessed based off of their peers as they exit college and into this profession. So your mechanical engineers, your structural engineers, your data scientists, your social workers, go down the list. Create as diversified pricing index as possible, get as low a negative score as possible, and then say teacher salaries are this as opposed to as the market says so, and then tether it to that. We don't have to go into negotiations every year to say are teachers worth it or not, because that all that does is separate and divide our communities. You look at Battleground and how divisive that conversation was, because it was a question of are teachers worth it or not. We just have to get past that and recognize that teachers deserve respect for the jobs that they do and the contribution that they have to our community. Second, I want to create a structure by which we can in real time visualize the impacts of legislation as it's being proposed. And so what that is, you create a service as a software, SaaS, system that allows for individual school districts down to the most granular level at the individual level to input the data of their costs as they've allocated it within their budgeting and prioritization, so that as the state now moves that slide bar up and down for how much they're going to spend or how much they're not going to spend, they can have a centralized dashboard to say this number of schools will have this amount of impact. And creating that tool is something that every business uses for modeling across the industry. It's just government is always slow to catch up. This is an opportunity for us to go leaps and bounds ahead of any other state. I don't know of another state that's really doing this, but applying basic business principles with modeling and statistics to school evaluations. Get beyond these pivot tables and Excel sheets. Like I'm a data scientist. I love my Excel sheets. I swear to you. But the powers that are out there for real-time visibility, so that the superintendents don't have to come back in June and July and ask the legislature for guidance. The legislature's like, I don't know, you guys are the experts, do what you want. Like, we set up a fight because we didn't have the data and we weren't interested in making a systematic change to be able to better analyze the data.
And what was the most observable example of that as you watched the McCleary payout?
Our school, to me, the school counselors. Look across our society in general as a mental health crisis. Across the country, here in Southwest Washington, our rural areas in particular, because they have limited access to mental health care, and I think we've abdicated our responsibilities. You evaluate a community based off of how well it takes care of those worse off in its community. and those who need greatest assistance. And I think that right there is where the prototypical school needs to be readdressed. It is entirely outdated. It has failed to assess the degradation of mental health services in the private community, in the service community, as well as whether it's healthcare or otherwise. The 16-bed limit to try to prevent these massive, dysfunctional healthcare organizations prevents local service providers to administer care in any meaningful manner that's cost effective and economically viable. So we've levied that responsibility on the schools. We say, schools, you figure it out. Now hire more counselors, put it on your payroll, find a levy, pass a bond, and pay for your counselors that you need to handle this localized individual problem. And I think that right there is where we failed to meet the mark, because we are only funding towards this prototypical school model that doesn't account for the diversity of educational requirements, whether it's your high cap programs or your STEM programs, and we haven't addressed those that need most, your individual education programs and your special needs. And I think right now we've hamstrung our modern education system because of our absence of understanding.
Great. Brandon.
Brandon, what were your thoughts about the solution the legislature came up with?
Sure. McCleary was solved over a number of pieces of legislation. The most notable, of course, was 2242, when the salary schedules and most of the changes went into place. Of course, McCleary was not actually a teacher's salary lawsuit. It was an equity lawsuit. It was in bringing the districts that were property poor or unable to pass a levy up to the level of the districts that, quite honestly, we have in Clark County. Vancouver, Evergreen, Camas, Richfield, they were at the top of their game. And good on their voters. Their voters decided it was worth investing in their K-12 education system, and they did. Obviously, that was not possible around the state. A school in Omak was maybe, not able to pass the same levies or didn't have the same support as a school in Vancouver did. And that's why McCleary started. It started so that each child in the state of Washington had access to the same kind of education and opportunities. Again, it wasn't a teacher's salary bill, but we obviously got to that point, and we obviously had to raise up several teacher salaries. I mean, the state salary schedule started at $35,000. In Vancouver and Evergreen and Camas, it was over $45,000 to begin with, but that's another story for another day. Again, so when we get it down to the McCleary solution, I think the McCleary solution was spot on, and I think the McCleary solution is very defendable, and I think the McCleary solution is very clear. 2242, despite what we might have just heard, was not an 11th hour decision, and it was not done without metrics and data. We talk about professional teacher salaries. We didn't pull those numbers out of the air. We hired the same type of firms that Fortune 500 companies hire to determine what professional salaries were. They look at education, they look at experience, they look at geography, they look at regionalization, and they made these decisions, or at least made suggestions to us. Those salary schedules were very clear. It's for a 23-year-old who just got out of college, about $45,000 with full benefits and retirement. That is a professional salary for a bachelor's degree with whatever the certain working conditions are that teachers have. For an experienced tenured teacher with a master's, it was somewhere around $95,000. And we put that legislation into place. We did use this prototypical school model, which says, if you're a school district with this many students, you're going to have so many new teachers, experienced teachers, middle teachers. Here's your pot of money. There was a lot of showmanship, a lot of fireworks around the outside. There was a lot of claims about confusion. And to this day, that baffles me. We sent a fixed amount of money to the districts and said, this is what you have to hire teachers with. I mean, it's no different than you probably organize around here, right? I mean, you tell Greg he's got, $1 million to hire reporters with, and then if Greg comes, yeah, right, right? And then Greg comes back and says, sorry, Scott and Jody, I spent, $1.1 million. What do you do at that point? I mean, that's really the situation that we're in. We appropriated more than enough money for competitive and appropriate and professional salaries. And the school districts, although, I agree they are probably in a tough decision making these negotiations, wound up spending more. So McCleary itself is done, but what are the next steps? We're going to have a situation in the next legislature we're going to have to deal with. We already know the school district's going to come and ask for that local levy lid to be increased. That levy lid we promised our taxpayers was going to go down to $1.50. If they stuck with us for 1 year of a little bit of pain, they're going to come back and ask, I'm hearing right now, for 50 more cents. For me, that's a non-starter. I mean, I'm a parent, and while the school district legislature isn't necessarily a parent-child relationship, I mean, we set the parameters, and we've got to stick to them. What does that mean? Does that mean we just cut the districts off at their knees and let them fail? Of course not. But what is the legislature going to have to do? I think the legislature, quite honestly, is going to have to take the reins on this and say, we gave you the local control, it didn't work out, it's time for a state salary schedule, and I'm sorry, whatever side of the equation you're on, you might like it, you might not, but we've got to stay within the budget that we set. We've got to give the taxpayers what we promised them. And quite frankly, these budgets, or these contracts that were passed, one part of it is the salary. What these contracts are going to do to our pension system in Washington State is unimaginable. I mean, we're talking about $250 million more a year in pension liabilities because of the overruns in these contracts. That's not something we can stomach. I mean, we can definitely find things to cut in state government, but these numbers are going to get way too big, way too quick. So the legislature will have to step up and do some things here, but it's not because of bad legislation, and it's not because of a lack of clarity. It's because the process didn't work out as it was instructed to work out. As far as education, McCleary was a lawsuit. McCleary was a set of actions the court required us to take. McCleary is not education in perpetuity. We have to continue to involve. We do rely on our schools for things that we didn't rely on them in the past for. We rely on them, for better or worse, to feed kids, to counsel kids, to provide them the mental support and sometimes even housing services that they need. I mean, we have school districts that send home bags of food on the weekend because parents aren't able to make it work for whatever reason. I mean, schools are changing, and the other thing we have to continue to focus on is results. You know, these can't be daycares, and they're not. But we have to make sure those graduation rates continue to go up, that we're not losing kids, due to whatever the circumstance is. So education is not done, but McCleary is done.
So Brandon, did the legislature miss an opportunity to construct and better control the situation when McCleary was passed? Because wasn't it kind of easy to see what was going to happen with the state unions and teacher salaries? I mean, how could that have been avoided?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. McCleary 2242 was a very good piece of legislation that you could get 80 some odd legislators to vote for. Mm-hmm. McCleary was not a perfect piece of legislation, and I think that kind of state salary schedule that you didn't say, but I feel like was kind of alluded to, was a big part of that. I don't think there's any question that the local bargaining stayed in because that special interest wanted it in. There was confusion added with the passage of 6362. That was the legislation that brought this $1 billion and these 20% raises that never existed, but it moved it forward 1 year in a budget before the cuts came. So I think...
and that was required by the court.
Moving the billion
yes.
Forward? Well, to get out of the court order a year earlier, the answer would be yes, but take that as you will. So the long and short of it is yes. Olympia is still a place of politics, and I don't want to say anybody's bought and paid for. That would be unfair, but I think that this was avoidable, and I think it was also not accidental.
And what about, really quick, what are your thoughts on Initiative 1639 regarding gun control? And do you feel we have a problem with gun violence in this country?
So to start off with, yes, I think we do have a problem with gun violence, but more deeply we have a problem with poverty and wealth disparity. Poverty and desperation is the root cause of all gun violence. Desperation, whether it be mental health or socioeconomic, but those realities are what drive gun violence. I think that, we have seen a benefit here for taking a more liberal approach and legalizing marijuana. It's reduced our opioid use, and and it's improved our overall standard of living. That has also reduced the burden on police officers to enforce these laws on marijuana, and it's allowed us to undermine the drug trafficking and cartels that profit off of those illegal markets. I think that's an opportunity for discussion and even further as far as the root causes. But to address 1639, that is a reaction to the symptom, if you will. Root cause. The symptom we're facing is people shooting either one another in personal relationship problems, or a mass shooting situation where people are taking guns into schools and killing children. I think after Sandy Hook, that was my eye-opening experience to recognize that we are, as a country, are not prepared to address a cultural identity with our weapons. I grew up on a farm. I've been hunting since I was 7, started with squirrels and worked my way up from there. The reality is that 1639 misses the mark in terms of defining what an assault rifle is. That is a useless term for any type of discussion. I think that it does pose a valid question. If you're not able to buy booze until you're 21, why should you be able to buy a semi-automatic gas-operated firearm? I think that's a superb question to ask. But if you want to own a gun, I've always heard this, people want to own a gun, the Marine Corps is always asking for recruits, and we will give you many guns that are superb. But nonetheless, to the point of 1639, I think that the only part of it that I really love, and I genuinely love this, is that it holds gun owners accountable for being irresponsible. And everything that I've ever done in my entire life, I was reminded that you are responsible for your actions and your actions alone. Storage of a weapon is one of the most important actions that a gun owner can take. Treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Never point a weapon at anything you do not intend to shoot. Keep your finger straight off the trigger until you intend to fire, and keep your weapon unsafe until you intend to fire. All of those 4 things are applicable to a gun owner in the house. And you can't oblige those 4 rules when you're not holding the gun if it's not locked up, either if it's a trigger lock, a bolt lock, or a safe. And if you fail to do that, and your son takes the gun to school and shoots his peers, you should be liable in some way, whether it's civilly or criminally. I prefer civilly, but this is where I want to get the conversation, and this is where I offer an innovative opportunity, like that most people, I think, they get dragged down into the same conversations just rehashed from before. We have an opportunity right now to accept that the free market is the most powerful force in the world to benefit humanity. More people are out of poverty now because of the free market and capitalism. That same thing can be applied to our gun violence problem. We just simply need, as Smith said, we need to align incentives and priorities. And so aligning incentives to me here is simply applying a lifetime warranty or insurance package with every gun purchase. What this allows you to do is basically say, insurance companies, gun owners, gun industry, no more government involvement. The government will step out of the business of gun ownership and gun regulation. You can keep automatic weapons, high explosives, whatever you want. Maybe not high explosives. We've learned that's a little too catastrophic as an arm. But we're out of the gun industry management. It's on you. But just know that we will hold the gun insurance associated with that gun liable in any civic case where that gun is used to kill somebody. And the value of a person's life, as callous it is millions of dollars over the life of somebody, especially if they're 17, 18 years old in Chicago or Washington, D.C. or Vancouver, Washington. Like, we're talking millions of dollars. And I guarantee that the insurance company will work with gun owners and gun manufacturers to figure out the gun violence problem, to make sure that guns are not used in violent crime, whether it's some of those innovative biometric gun operations or whatever else. The free market will find a solution, but you have to align that cost and that burden on the gun owners and the gun industry and the insurer to have it aligned. Everybody benefits. The community benefits. The individual gun owner benefits. We don't, because we're not, the government's not making callous rules or, uneducated rules of an assault rifle. Just let them figure it out and let them pay for the cost that they levy on and they burden our society with.
Brandon, your thoughts on 1639?
Yeah, and I'm going to be opposed to 1639 for a lot of obvious reasons. I mean, I think your original question asked if we had a gun problem and
gun violence.
A gun violence problem. Thank you. And I think the simple answer is, while one death is unacceptable, I think the answer to that question is no. We have a people problem in some areas, whether you want to call it a mental health problem or a poverty problem or whatever the factor is. You know, the gun is the tool and the attitude is the problem, and that's what we have to address. 1639, I think, is very poorly thought out legislation. I mean, obviously, it gets into the semi-automatic rifle world, and even in the initiative, they use the word assault rifle. I mean, we're talking about the best technology 1956 has to offer here. So it's not a new revolutionary product they're talking about. You're talking about, again, defining who's an adult, right? Is it 18? Is it 21? Why do we have all these different differences? We can have those debates, but I think it's a pretty simple debate in my mind that an 18-year-old is an adult. And one day my daughter will be 18. I'm going to say that's not true, but that's not really the point. It's a piece of legislation that literally creates a gun registry. Right now, you get a background check for a firearm, and they do the check, and at least in theory, they toss that out afterwards. These ones stay on file for a long time, and while there's probably no nefarious use for that right now, that's a concern people have. This initiative requires, basically a Mr. Yuck sticker to be put on a firearm at purchase. You're going to get the same, basic warning you get on a package of cigarettes if you were to buy some when you buy a gun. I think that is a social engineering thing that we need not encroach upon. And, firearm storage is in there, and the one thing I think we'd agree on is firearm storage is paramount. But proper firearm storage is different for every person. I don't think we have a problem with handguns lying around on coffee tables in homes with children. I think gun owners are by nature responsible, and there are going to be some, of course, that aren't. We have a civil court system for those reasons. Whether or not you get charged for a crime, I think is a step too far. I think there are solutions to these problems. When it comes to firearm storage, though, I think it's also important to note that everyone's circumstances are different. I'm not a big, gun guy. My house is protected, but we don't have a lot of spare firearms hanging around our house. But I have to think of situations outside of mine. I live in a fairly nice neighborhood. I'm not worried about someone breaking down the door, but we're protected if we need it. There's situations that I could just imagine don't fit in that box. I mean, I think of, say a female that buys a firearm because they're worried about their ex coming home and doing something dangerous. Do they have time to go to the safe and punch in the code and get the clip from the other side of the house and get this from there and then go protect themselves? I think everyone's situation is different, and you're going to have to take every situation individually. I don't know how you enforce a law about gun storage. Obviously, I don't think the intent is to have police officers going door to door saying, "Show me your gun safe." But what good is a law that can only be enforced after the fact? 1639 has a whole host of problems as far as I'm concerned. And even if you find ambiguity in the Second Amendment with the terms militia and things like that, the Washington State Constitution is even more clear. It is shall not be infringed for personal use or militia means. So I think we're taking a step too far here, and I think when you only focus on this initiative, not saying that you're ignoring everything else that's currently in law. Whether or not you agree with it, we have extreme risk protection orders in this state. I wouldn't have voted for it, but that's fine. If you suspect someone is going to harm themselves or someone else, you call the cops, and the cops can go take away their firearm. I mean, we're not talking about the wild, wild west where there's no regulations. Guns are heavily regulated in Washington, and I don't think this initiative solves the problem.
Yeah, just to backtrack on that.
Yeah.
So if 18 is an adult, and so you would advocate lowering the age for drinking or marijuana?
I don't know if I advocate for it, but I think there would be a very good case to be made.
Any other major issues we haven't touched upon?
Sure, there's thousands of issues.
I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
Like I said, there were 3,000 bills in the last session. So.
Can you run down? Well, then we'll move on. Give us your final pitch, why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any notable endorsements.
Chris? So as I was mentioning, we have an opportunity right now to both hold people accountable for bad legislation, whether it's McCleary or trying to vote with concealed personal records that are should have public access for us to hold people accountable, but mainly for not having enough vision. Like that's the thing that we're basically asking ourselves: does the current state have enough vision to be able to look to the future and prepare us so that we're better off in 20, 30 years? And I think that's where I offer a unique opportunity, both in terms of my vision for education opportunities, vision for our economy, and the vision for the individual person working and trying to take care of their family. That's what I offer that's unique. That's what I hope to bring to Olympia and represent the 18th with honor as I look to the future to create the best opportunity. So that right there is kind of why I've gotten so much support from individual donors. The vast majority of the folks bringing in money to me and supporting me are individuals that have believed in this message. The labor unions are certainly also behind me. I've been focusing on opportunities to tie veteran issues into our state legislature, because veterans are otherwise ignored both at the federal level and the state level. And it's unexcusable that we send forward our citizens to become war fighters, and then we ignore them when they come return. I have a proposal right now, a white paper that's being levied. It's been circulated around the National Capital Region. It's getting a lot of traction on the Armed Services Committee within the Office of Secretary of Defense, and it's effectively a decentralized program for the separations process to allow us to recruit and attract veterans based off the evaluation of that veteran transition process. It allows for direct transition of electronic medical records into the VA system, the service record into the VA system, as well as allowing for trades, unions, industry, education to have a single point of access with whether it's our veteran resource centers or otherwise, to be able to get access to those veterans when they transition and provide them the services that they want to provide. We have a shortage of labor across the country. We need to recognize that we need more skilled tradesmen, and the veteran community needs more opportunities to insulate them from hardship. They're going to have fights with their spouses. They're going to have disruptions with their kids. But if they have a job to go back to the next day, that at least gives you some stability in your life to avoid crisis. It reduces your veteran unemployment. It reduces your veteran homelessness. It reduces your veteran substance abuse, and it reduces, most importantly, your veteran suicide. That's what I want to be able to bring to Washington that makes us unique and creates an opportunity for not just our veteran community, but when we solve our veteran community problems with those 4 problems, we now have a template that can be duplicated and recreated for the entire country and the entire community. That's my what I offer, and I hope that the citizens of the 18th recognize and will support me in that.
Great, thank you. Brandon?
Being a state representative is a very unique job, but it's not a completely unique job. And every 2 years, I get to have my skills and my job performance evaluated, and that's what's going to happen this year. I'm happy to run on my record and let people judge what we've done as a elected body, and myself as a representative. Let those be the determining factors. The legislature is a tricky world, and I don't really know how you determine success. I feel like I've had a lot of it. Whether it's the fact that I have more bills signed into law than any other serving House member in our area. I think that's a pretty big feather in my hat. Whether it's the fact that I can go reach out my hand and shake it with anybody in the legislature and have a good conversation that's productive, I think that's a feather in my hat. Whether it's trophies on a shelf or local statesman of the year awards, I think those are good things that I am happy to rely on, but that's not the only thing. We have a pretty good thing going here in Clark County. The Democrats and Republicans are working well together. We're getting things done, and I think I heard the term vision come up earlier. I think that's where I exceed and where I excel. Clark County is, like I mentioned, a unique place and a wonderful place, and I know it's my job to not only take care of us today, but to plan for that future 10 and 20 and 30 years down the road. Clark County is not going to stop growing. We're probably going to slow down at some point when the rest of the country does, but I think we're going to be insulated to some degree as well, and we've got to plan that right. we need to make sure that while we're always going to support or rely on Oregon for some things, that we have our own identity and our own economy, and we can survive on our own. And I think that's something that I've worked very hard to achieve. The legislature is an interesting place. It's a place that takes a lot of learning, and it's a place that not everyone's successful in. But again, I'm happy to put my record out there for people to judge. And I know that when folks interact with my office, whether it be for a legislative purpose or maybe they just need help with an agency or help getting their food stamps or whatever they're doing, I know they're served well. Part of that's because of me. Part of that's because I have the best legislative assistant in Peter Gilmore. But it's something I take a lot of pride in as a well-run office that serves the people. This is a job that people aren't meant to do forever. I'm not going to do it forever, but I know that I still have some great things to offer the people of the 18th District, and happy to offer myself up again.
Great. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.